Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Hello everyone and welcome to Ask Rob and Rob, the show where you get your questions in, normally property related, and we get our answers in, normally related to the question asked. And that concept has worked very well for over 250 episodes now, so let's not stop. Today we've got two great questions in from James and Kathy, but before we get started, let's give you a reminder of how you can get involved.
Yep, if you've got something you'd love to hear the answer to, then you can give us a call on 013 808 0035. That's 013 808 0035. Or you can go to propertyhub.net/ask if you're feeling a bit more modern and leave us a voicemail there instead. So let's get on to our first question today. This one comes from James.
Hi Rob and Rob, this is James here from St Albans. Firstly, I'd like to say that I've only been listening to your podcast for a couple of weeks, had a bit of a binge session, been finding it really useful, if anything, just to act as a bit of a sounding board on my property journey. So thank you very much for all the great info. A couple of quick questions. I'm looking at new flats by some developers around key locations. I get the impression that they are open for discounts on these new developments as they're all off plan, but would you happen to know what a reasonable starting position would be as a general rule of thumb in terms of a discount to be asking for? And secondly, some of these developments have great amenities that come with fairly high service charge. Should I be worried about these high charges, or do they generally get offset by the amount of rent I can charge?
Hey James, thanks for your question. It's great to see that you're getting involved in property and looking at taking those first steps. It's also pleasing to say that you want to get yourself the best deal possible. I know it sounds like an obvious thing, but not everyone does it. So the first thing I'd want to establish is what the fair market value is for that property. The asking price might not be the fair value. The asking price might be higher than the fair value, and occasionally, although not very often, it could be a bit lower. Or the asking price might be bob on. But do that research. Look at comparables in the area, looking for a like-for-like comparisons or as close to as possible, places with similar facilities, standard spec, and sizes. And in the city centre, there should be enough comparables out there for you to do that, and then come to a decision on whether the asking price is a fair value. Now, let's just for now assume it is. So you want to negotiate. Well, that will come down to a few things. Where it is and what the market's doing right now. So today, when this episode goes out in October 2020, the market, although it's not publicly discussed that much, is quite strong in key cities. So for example, in Manchester right now, trying to negotiate with a developer is hard work because they are selling hand over fist. But in London, Cambridge, Aberdeen, you might be able to get yourself a deal because the market isn't as buoyant there. So it will depend on the location that you're targeting. The time of year can also help. In December and August, not as many sales will happen. So again, it's another opportunity to try and do a deal. So there's a few things to think about before putting your offer in. But when you go forward, how much should you ask for off? Well, I would go in at 10%. You almost certainly won't get 10% off. But it's cheeky enough for them to reply, but not so cheeky that they're not going to even reply to you. It's a big discount, it's a big number, but I would start there and see how you get on. But remember, the offer is just part of the process. Explaining the strength of your offer is also useful as well. So if it's off plan, they'll be looking for a quick exchange. So you can let them know that your deposit's ready and you've got a solicitor lined up. Little things, but it just shows you're serious. So it's just all about presenting your offer in its best light. You might get lucky and they might accept it, or you might get pushed down to something like 5%, 4% or lower. But remember, any discount of what you perceive to be the market value is better than no discount. But also remember, if it's a buoyant market, don't be too offended or discouraged if they don't offer you anything. As for service charges, that's a lot easier. You just account for them when you're doing your cash flow. If big service charges mean that you get wonderful facilities and those wonderful facilities allow you to attract a really good rent, then they're more than paid for in that way. It always baffles me when people say, oh, I don't want to invest in apartments because of service charges. But often, even when you include those service charges, apartments can give better returns than houses. Not always the case, and it will depend on area by area, but people just perceive service charges mean lower return, when it's actually quite often far from the case. So run your numbers, include all your costs, and obviously the service charges, against your income, the rent, and then look at the return and decide, is that acceptable? Am I happy with that? And then compare it to other properties that without service charges, like houses, and gauge the difference and see, is it about right? Is it what I should expect for that area? So don't let service charges put you off. And in fact, if you can get service charges with a good return, then they're worth a weight in gold because they're going to look after that property for you. It means the amount of maintenance costs that you have in the future will also be reduced, compared to a house where all the maintenance issues are for you to cover financially. So plenty for you to think about there, James, and good luck with getting your offers in.
Okay, our second question today comes from Kathy.
Hi, Rob and Rob. This is Kathy here. I've got a question about regulated tenancies. Just wondering, why would anybody want to buy one? Doesn't it mean that you can't get rid of the tenants if they stop paying the rent? I've seen some that have been selling at auction, and they seem to be selling quite well, quite a bit over the guide price. So I'm just wondering, why would anybody buy a property with a regulated tenancy? Yeah, I'd love to hear your explanation. Thanks so much. Bye.
This is a great thing about Ask Rob and Rob. 256 episodes, and we've never mentioned regulated tenancies. We probably never would have done if Kathy hadn't asked, so thank you. The reason regulated tenancies don't get talked about much is that they are a part of history, really. They only relate to tenancies that started before 1989, so quite a long time ago. And as a result, there aren't that many of them left around. Apparently, there's about 75,000 of them left in the UK still. So it's not something you'll come across often, but you do see them selling at auction, which is what Kathy mentioned. So what does regulated tenancy actually mean? It's basically a form of tenancy that gives tenants far more protection than they have these days on a standard AST. And the rents are set in a different way. Rents on regulated tenancies are based on something called a fair rent, which is set by the valuation office, not by market rates. And as a result, the rents that are paid on those tenancies, especially because they've been going on for a very long time, are often much, much lower than you'd get in the market. So if the tenant's got more protection and the rent that you get is lower, why are these selling at auction? Why is anyone buying them, and why are they buying them for more than the guide price? Well, the answer to that mystery lies in what happens when the regulated tenancy ends. So that tenancy gives the occupier the right to live there for life. But because any tenancies of these that are still around have been going on for at least 30 years, it means a lot of the occupants are getting older. And although it sounds callous, when the occupant dies and that tenancy ends, you can replace them with a tenant who pays market rents. And as a result, the value of that property, because properties are all ultimately valued based on the rent, suddenly goes up. So if you had two houses next door to each other, one of which had a regulated tenancy and the other one didn't, the property with a regulated tenancy today would be a lot cheaper. But then when that tenancy ends, suddenly they're both worth the same amount again. So it is a legitimate business model that some big companies actually do to buy up these tenancies, wait for those tenancies to naturally end, and then benefit from the uplift. Now, if that is something that sounds appealing, there's lots of things to be careful about here. So firstly, of course, evicting tenants is a lot harder. It's not impossible, but rent arrears is only a discretionary ground for eviction. So if a tenant has significant arrears, you can still apply to the court, but you won't necessarily be able to remove them. So that's one risk factor. Another is in the nature of the tenancy. Some regulated tenancies have rights of succession, which means that under certain conditions, if the occupier dies, another tenant can take it over on the same terms. So it might be that you're expecting this tenancy to end and be able to get an uplift in the property, but in fact that doesn't happen. So as a result, this is a highly specialist area. It's something that some investors do very successfully because this is their business model and they know it inside out. But if it's just something that you've seen at auction and it looks kind of interesting and you feel like having a dabble, I'd suggest that you either stay away or approach it very, very carefully. But hopefully, Kathy, even though it might not be for you, you now understand why some investors are buying them.
So thank you, James. Thank you, Kathy. And thank you for listening. Remember, we're back on Thursday with the main property podcast, so you don't want to miss that. And of course, back next Tuesday with Ask Rob and Rob. So until then, take care, everyone. Have fun. Bye-bye.